Hello, and thank you for joining the POCUS Certification Academy for today's webinar. I'm Maddie, and I'll be your facilitator today. We are now starting, so all lines have been muted. Please set your chat box settings to all attendees and panelists, and use the chat box for any questions or comments that you have throughout the session. Today, we have Dr. Bernard Bulwer joining us as our webinar presenter. Dr. Bulwer's career focus is to educate and equip today's students and practitioners with the foundational tools for responsible use of cardiac ultrasound echo stethoscopes. Such tools are designed to complement medical education, diagnostic medical sonography programs, clinical practice, and global health. Dr. Bulwer, a native of Belize, has been recognized as a person of extraordinary ability based on his contribution in the field of echocardiography education. He has served as an author, co-author, editor, and medical illustrator of a number of textbooks and didactic works in echocardiography. Thank you, Dr. Bulwer, for being with us today.
Madeline, thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to share this topic, which is very close to the way I think about point-of-care ultrasound. The title is When POCUS Becomes Culture. When POCUS Becomes Culture, and the subtitle is Expanding POCUS Utilization Through Expanded Curricula. That's my affiliation here. Conflicts of interest, none declared. Point-of-care discussion today is summarized under these headings. We'll have a little look at history, the medical tradition, the challenges we face regarding whether we disrupt or whether we complement current medical education and training standards. Then mirroring tradition with technology. We look at the unique advantages of ultrasound and some of what I consider to be the major obstacles to POCUS becoming culture, and how do we move forward in building POCUS curricula which is consistent with medical tradition. First, learning from history. We're all familiar with the history of the stethoscope some 200 years ago. This was first published back in 1819 by the French carpenter turned physician. That helped because he had to build his own first stethoscope, which is what is depicted here. Unfortunately, he passed away at the age of 45, but he left a legacy of a treatise regarding the Lanic stethoscope. And this seminal volume became the catalyst for the transformation or the extension of the physical examination. From 1819 through the rest of the 18th century, there were advances in terms of having flexible stethoscopes with like a trumpet, as they call it here. And going through to the next century, 1900s, and in 1960s, that culminated with the Littman cardiologist stethoscope. And that had a whole series that followed it. And then we started having some additional advances regarding the whole extension of the physical examination. And that was having digital stethoscopes. In this case here, even augmented with the electrocardiogram. We also had the advent of even more miniature devices, which call themselves the future stethoscopes, as we see one example here with the GEV scan. What do I mean by medical tradition or culture? We know what that means. It has to do with the essence of how a physician interacts with the patient, a healthcare professional with the patient, and just depicting that we're dealing with a relationship between a professional and a patient, but we all human beings are endowed with the ability to develop tools to help extend or elucidate the physical examination. It has become culture in the sense that the stethoscope epitomizes, it is a symbol of the medical profession. We can jokingly call it the stethoscope or the status quo. But do not disrespect the fact that pretty much everything in life has some form of culture or tradition. And there is a tendency, especially when new technology like point of care ultrasound comes along, there is a tendency for us to say, hey, that's old, in with the new, and we run the risk of alienating, or even unconsciously marginalizing the fact that we can't just disrupt what is done in medicine and overnight replace it with a new device. You have to understand that transition. What does it take for a physician carrying a stethoscope to being one who is as comfortable with the point of care device as they are with the traditional stethoscope?
Medicine is one of the most traditional specialties. It's as much an art as it is a science. Despite all that evolution in evidence-based medicine, so much of the doctor-patient relationships and so much of what doctors do, how they train, their attitudes towards even learning new skills and from who they learn, all those things, have an established basis in a heavy amount of seniority and hierarchy. We learn from our teachers, we look up to them, and we, what they say is almost gospel. And herein lies a challenge, because point of care technology, right, is heavily tied in with at the end of the day, it's data processing. This is software, and we're looking at new technology that mirrors the smartphone. And that brings a big challenge to those who are the ultimate decision makers in medicine, who are not the students, not the people at the bottom. And these are some of the challenges that we face: how to develop the proper type curriculum, and how to this whole issue of what are the pathways to proficiency and competence. That's not something that those who have not been down that road, find it easy to adopt to. And so when we speak about disruption in medicine, is it the paradigm that we should speak about? Or is it more one of complementing what doctors typically do? And people in technology are very familiar with this Gartner hype cycle, when you say, wow, this technology is the best thing ever, right? And then there's this predictable phase where it's not as good as it was promised, and then it tends to settle somewhere in between. There are other ways of looking at how any new technology, medical technology included, is adopted. And there is this gap that corresponds with this disillusionment. In anything, you'll always have the geeks and the early adopters, right? But then you'll always have the mainstream that tends to lag behind. And what Rogers had described was something that was very predictable in terms of adoption of technology, right? It's a sociological model called the Rogers curve of what they call technology diffusion, how technology gets into and becomes incorporated into what we do. And so this adoption or acceptance of any new product, including point of care ultrasound, is a significant challenge in who uses and adopts this technology. It's heavily based on who people are and how they think and what they value. So it's not a smooth sailing that you just have innovative early adopters and then it moves to the mainstream, right? Yes, you have those who have big ideas and want to solve problems, right? But then there are those who may adopt technology based on, is this going to save me time? Is this going to save money? Is this going to help me to deliver better patient care? And then there are those who come on board later, but they tend to adopt a wait-and-see approach. And there are some who perhaps never change. Those are the skeptics and the laggards, and perhaps they, are entitled to remaining that way. And this is true. Some people will never, even today, we see some of their parents and grandparents, they don't come anywhere near to a cell phone or a computer. I know that situation well, coming from the late. My mom used a FaceTime, but she wouldn't touch the computer. When the stethoscope came out, this was the quote from Queen Victoria's physician. He was a Scottish physician, the physician to the Queen of United Kingdom. And he translated Lennox's treatise. And he's famous for this quote. He said, yes, that it will ever come into general practice, I am extremely doubtful, because its beneficial application requires much time and gives a good bit of trouble to both the patient and the practitioner. I pretty much think I could stop here, but I won't. But this was 100 and almost 200 years ago. This statement here gets at the core of especially technology adoption in medicine, right? If something requires much time in a profession that is pretty established, even though it evolves with caution and it evolves based on time, that is a challenge. And if there's a lot of effort that needs to be put into it, it's going to have to overcome certain hurdles, especially for the mainstream. And what we see here is that even the New England Journal of Medicine back then, right, it took 2 years before they actually reported on this. They were waiting to see where the wind was blowing. 60 years later, people were still using their stethoscope and disrespecting, using, direct auscultation with the ear and not a stethoscope. The American Heart Association founder, right, this is almost over 100 years later, he still did not adopt the stethoscope. And remember, this is the American Heart Association founder, a cardiologist, 100 years later, not using that stuff. So this whole issue of technology adoption and the barriers to adoption and jumping over this chasm is something else. And to me, one of the big challenges for this slide is how do we help bridge that gap from those who are the geeks and the early adopters? How does this become a part of mainstream? And I think even when you look at human psychology, right, the best way to lose an audience is to disrespect who they are or what they do. Let someone criticize your house culture or your country or your religion or your school or something that you hold dear to. That's the best way of losing someone. And if you look at the stethoscope, just look at it today. Fast forward 150 years later, it comes in all sizes, shapes, and forms, right? I mean, even a pregnant mother can have her own stethoscope, even for whatever. But my point is that pretty much anyone, uses a stethoscope nowadays. And now with addition of new technology like the smartphone, the interesting thing with POCUS is that because it's data processing and based on processing all those echoes and displaying them in real time, it perfectly syncs with the smartphone technology. As a matter of fact, it is, even advances in the stethoscope using digital auscultation, those even with EKG and with some now with artificial intelligence and smartphone, they literally mirror each other in more ways than one. And I think what is helpful to understand is that the beautiful thing about POCUS compared to other technologies, it's actually not strange. It is actually mainstream to what is done in medical practice. So ultrasound, and especially in the case of cardiac ultrasound, it's the most widely used cardiac imaging technique. These are typically very expensive instruments. They've evolved. They have so much bells and whistles. So much of it has to do with computer algorithms or post-processing or how to improve the image quality and how to reduce noise. But a lot of the technology in those big machines, right? There's no, for example, the V-Scan is one of the earlier ones that came out after the Epson T10. This is a really solid transducer. You have established companies like Philips have gone in there. You've had upstart, new startups like Butterfly, which is, they're flying around pretty much pollinating every place. But they themselves, you know, tapped into the smartphone technology, as well as other companies like Clarios. The interesting thing is that the price innovation itself is a big barrier. That's not the focus today, but an instrument like this, when it came out, was like $10,000, the V-Scan, right? The Lumify, if you ended up paying for it on subscription, it came up to like $15,000. I don't know the price they produced, but for Butterfly to make a strategic decision that they were going to take it down to $2,000, you know, with a subscription and other add-ins, you know, that's a game changer. And you also had, of note, one thing with these devices here is that they scale down, they're battery powered, they're portable, they fit in your pocket, but if you notice, they don't have any digital signal, so they've kind of disrespected or disregarded the stethoscope, which is okay because some people don't need that for what they need it to do. But then there are maybe those who decided that, you know what, we want to mirror tradition a bit more, and hey, let's put an EKG attached to it. Like, for example, this instrument here has, this is a Cosmos platform. They have EKG attached along with the audio stethoscope. You could have it with the digital stethoscope, or you could have an external speakerphone, right? And ultrasound caught on because it makes a difference. The physical exam alone doesn't cut it. You'll have quite a bit of medical errors and adverse events. You will miss or misinterpret or delay diagnosis, or have patients, you know, subject to unnecessary exams and unnecessary delay. And so ultrasound has really been a game changer in medicine. It's an established clinical utility, big advantage, right? It's safe when used as a medical instrument. It's versatile. Ultrasound, there's so many things that you can do with ultrasound, not just regular beam mode imaging and pulse wave Doppler, color flow Doppler, right? But there are so many other modalities. There's that you know, whether it has to do with deformation imaging or contrast imaging, there's so many things that ultrasound has been able to deliver, you know, very cost effectively, as well as this new portability, battery-powered smartphone or Wi-Fi connected devices. So we know ultrasound is safe. It has been changing practice. Speed, when speed is of an essence, for example, in the emergency room and critical care, you know, you can get the answers that you need to expedite treatment, scenario differential diagnosis. If you're dealing with global health, this is a huge game changer. There's some huge things happening, like rheumatic heart disease screening. I mean, 50 million people affected by that worldwide. And so this high technology can literally make a huge difference in global health and infrastructure, low infrastructure settings. The early adopters, like the emergency department, who were, you know, emergency medicine division, they were pioneers. They knew that they did not have to go through all these steps and wait for radiology or medical imaging. We can literally cut down big time on getting the answers we need to get the job done. So we can expedite management using POCUS, its cost effectiveness, and improve patient outcomes. These have been huge drivers for those early adopters. They did not need a lot of encouragement to jump onto POCUS. So you had, as I said, the global pioneers here. Anesthesia, right, and perioperative and also the whole critical care environment where time is of an essence. They jumped on this and they moved ahead. But what about the rest here, right? Because we have the situation where sorry about that. We have a situation where you had the earliest adopters ran far ahead, and then you had the more conservative parts of medicine, medical education and so forth. They took some time to get on board. And here are where some of the challenges really set in. Issues of attitude. There's people who have positive attitudes towards this. That's, that helps. Negative attitudes, that sucks. But the whole issue of education, who is going to train, how is this going to be set up, how we're going to build the curriculum, these are huge challenges. What is the approach? Do we adopt the approach that the emergency and critical care people use? Maybe, maybe not, right? Who's going to teach? How does this integrate with workflow? What kind of equipment that we need? Is this something that's going to be institutionally kosher? Is it going to be, do we have the both institutional as well as external professional society support? Those are some of the real challenges. And so within this culture of medicine, there are these things that need to be addressed for us to be able to have point of care ultrasound being, integrated, how to deal with the tradition, how to train the trainers, how to develop the curriculum, and what pathways to proficiency and competence will we put in place. The issues of cost, who is going to pay for it? Is it going to benefit? What does the data show? Is this going to complicate our lives? Safety is not really an issue, but workflow is important. And for many, are we going to get paid? Reimbursement is a huge issue. As a matter of fact, it's one of the unspoken, they say some of the biggest incentives in life is if you can reimburse people, even if they don't like it, they may jump on the bandwagon. But integral to all of this discussion is that one size doesn't fit all. Truth be told, just think about the stethoscope. I know this is maybe not the best example, but pretty much everyone uses a stethoscope differently. They use it within their own scope of training, right? So it's a situation where if you're a nurse, you use it in a different way from if you're, well, not a general surgeon who may just want to listen to bowel sounds, but, even a cardiologist, old school cardiologist, the auscultation. And one thing we know is that this physical examination, it's a dying art. But nevertheless, when we speak about point of care ultrasound, is it the paradigm that we use for the early adopters? Does that really work for, let's say, does it have a place in medical school? How does an internist or primary care physician use it? They may not necessarily, they are not on the front line with dealing with patients who need a fast. They may have other issues. And so that's an important thing to realize. And I'm going to narrow the last section here on the curriculum aspect, because this is a huge topic. There are books written even by the early adopters. The early adopters who jumped, and adopted this, as I mentioned, the emergency medicine, anesthesia, perioperative critical care, they actually produced, really solid how-to for their kind of program. And I personally, these are actually my books here, but they really did a great job. One of the people mentioned, actually, a couple of them. You have Dr. Hoffman from South Carolina, you see the medical education. You have Dr. Blavis here. I actually went down to South Carolina back in 2013 to meet these guys because, one, I celebrated, saluted what they were doing, but part of my interest also was that I thought that, every specialty was doing their thing, and I was trying to see how can we help to bridge, what these guys have pioneered into the mainstream. And so even from back then, I started looking at how can I put together complementary education. This here is some of the publication from South Carolina. You had Dr. Hoffman, Dr. Rao, right? They really have been exemplary. They started the Society for Ultrasound in Medical Education. I think that was Dr. Hoffman, Blavis, Rao, and the South Carolina, Georgia, and team and others. Much of that came out of the AIUM, also the American Institute of Ultrasound in Medicine. But nevertheless, there is always this vexing issue, this adage, you can take a horse to water, how can you let them drink? How do we overcome and strategically try to have more medical schools or other healthcare institutions start adopting POCUS. The stethoscope is something that remains a part of tradition, but the word stethoscope itself meant a scope. It meant something that you can get a deeper look beyond what you can hear, you know, with your normal eyes, or what you can hear with your normal ears and see with your normal eyes. So the technology of point-of-care ultrasound, it's a window. It extends what most doctors normally do during, you know, the physical examination. And so within this context of developing the curriculum, doctors examine the chest. When I brought out my first manual back in 2010, thereabouts, I actually named this book not Point of Care Echocardiography or Focused Cardiac Ultrasound. I actually call it the Transthoracic Examination, because I did that deliberately, because I felt that this was more about examining the chest using a tool rather than the tool taking center stage, which sometimes can be a bit daunting. In other words, if you want to take a picture and you can take a better picture with a better camera, then you learn that new camera. And I think the same paradigm, that if you're examining the chest, right, and you can get a better window or a better scope, which in this case is point-of-care ultrasound, you may actually be in sync. In other words, they're not learning POCUS as a specialty. They're trying to do a better examination, you know, of the chest or of you know, whatever target organ. And it was in the same vein. It's not like I'm doing a stethoscope exam. I'm actually examining the heart, or examining the lungs, or I'm examining the chest. So it was more in an attempt to do that. And this also led me to start looking at the curriculum, at what medical students learn. For example, this is perhaps the most widely used medical student textbook in all undergraduate medicine around this country and beyond. If you look at this Pathophysiology of Heart Disease, a collaborative project between Harvard medical students and the faculty, if you look at these chapters, I know this may be too small to see, but I'll quickly shoot them out. Normal cardiac structure and function. What is that? That, by definition, is echocardiography. Normal. I know I'm focusing on the heart here, but I'm saying echo is cardiac structure and function, right? The cardiac cycle. What better thing to teach a cardiac cycle than seeing a heart beating, blood flowing, valves moving, and if you could put a stethoscope onto that, and you know, have the audio, or if you could see the EKG, that is a fascinating teaching tool for a medical student. And so if you start looking at cardiac imaging, of course, that's echo, but you look at the EKG, the heart cycle, that's echo speaks to that. If you start looking at chapters 5, 6, and 7, one is atherosclerosis, ischemic heart disease, acute coronary syndrome. What is that? That is echo, because echo looks at structure, function, and it also looks at hemodynamics. Chapter 8, valvular heart disease. See? Heart failure, that's echo. Cardiomyopathy, that's echo. Mechanism of cardiac arrhythmias, or what happens in arrhythmias, or hypertension, or the pericardium, peripheral vascular disease, congenital heart disease, or cardiovascular drugs. So my point is that everything that I see here that a medical student learns, echo is a complementary tool. Say, for example, when I was a medical student, there was a book that we used from Toronto called Moore's Anatomy. And what I love that book is that, unlike the traditional anatomy books, what it did is that it actually gave you these clinical vignettes. Why am I learning this, you know, all these, you know, the brachial plexus? Well, hey, you know, this is what happened. This is how a palsy looks. So they made it real. And I think ultrasound, point of care ultrasound for medical students is a different audience than the emergency. Because one of the challenges in the medical curriculum that they have done a lot of work But I am of the opinion that if you meet people where they're at, what they normally do, and if you could help them do that in a more engaging, a more informed, or better way, chances are that that technology, it may not be the destination, it may not be to have any kind of competence in ultrasound, but it actually is having the technology weave seamlessly into what they normally do. And I think to see POCUS as an educational tool is a valid proposition. And that was the reasoning behind why I did these books, because none of these books, the focus is not really on echocardiography. It's like the protocol, volume 1, that's about the language, 2 is echoanatomy, 3 is just the foundation, and the fact that the heart, has coronary arteries. Number 4, the fact that the heart does its systolic and diastolic function, and its hemodynamics, and how to learn, and how the machine works. So that was my approach, to see it as an extension of what we normally do. In the case of internists, an extension of the physical exam. In the case of, and this is from your group here, looking at focused cardiac ultrasound as an extension of the bedside exam. There are many problems that doctors deal with every day, murmurs that you would either miss or misinterpret. Some patient in shortness of breath, cyanosis, enlarged cardiac phylloids, and X-ray, patient who was fainted, chest pain, arrhythmias, all those things echo speaks to. And interestingly, what we have seen more recently, right, 2019, internal medicine, ACP hospitalists, right, to improve the physical exam. The ASC came on board late, 2013, and they did not even include medical students. They said this was not fit for medical students. Only in 2019, they said, you know what? Wow, medical students and novices, we have a curriculum for them too, right? And with JAC, American Heart Association, Journal of the American College of Cardiology, they came on board. And this is global health, where we screen. We had a paper in 2017 where we screened over 3,000 school children in Rwanda, Africa. This is a prototype using these same kind of devices, in Ghana. And so this is my last slide here, is that I believe that for point of care ultrasound to become a normal tool, right, that is integral or cultural to what we normally do, is that point of care ultrasound, POCUS, it's really a game changer. But we must remember that my view is that the most effective way, especially for the late adopters, the pragmatists, the conservatives, the laggards, is that if you meet the spectrum of medical education where it's at, and by medical education, I'm talking about professional, allied health, everyone who uses a stethoscope, the more we can reach people within their own scope of training, within the scope of what they normally do, I think that's when POCUS will really become a cultural tool representing, the medical profession, just like the stethoscope does today. So thank you, and that's where I end.
Thank you, Dr. Bulwer. This is fantastic. And I think it's a really interesting conversation, especially in the chat. We've had a number of people pinging us, messaging us, saying that they're teaching POCUS or they're looking to implement POCUS into their medical school. So I think we're going to have some really fantastic questions that come up. We've had a couple come through, and so I'm going to work my way through some of these. The first one that's come in, and for those who would have questions and would like to submit, now is the time. Throw them into the chat box or into the Q&A, and I will make sure we get it queued up for Dr. Bulwer to answer. The first question that's come in, Dr. Bulwer, is your topic is called When POCUS Becomes Culture. Can you dig into that a little bit and tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Okay, I know that's a very colloquial word that I was using, but by culture I mean the stethoscope, the binaural stethoscope that is around doctor's neck. That is part of medical culture, but it was not always that way. 100 years later, right, the founder of the American Heart Association, still disrespected that. He used his silk handkerchief, right? But today, it is literally the defining instrument of a physician. That's what I mean by culture. In my view, and realistically in terms of what the stethoscope had dreamed to become, right? The stethoscope that you see, that was the dream of the traditional stethoscope. And so what POCUS does is that it realizes that dream. And what my hope is that POCUS becomes integral to how doctors and healthcare professionals are trained, as well as, in every level across the specialty, we use a stethoscope. That is culture. The hope is the same for point of care ultrasound. That's what I mean by culture.
Thank you. That's great.
Integral to what we do. I'll tell you a little secret right now. It's not a secret. I don't travel without my point of care instrument. When I go on a plane, I mean, it's such a part of me, just like your smartphone. It's a part of you. That's culture. What Elon Musk is doing with Neuralink is not strange. All he's trying to do is download more information more quickly, more efficiently. I said that because the same paradigm, right, where you have an extension of you, a tool, because at the end of the day, these are tools. Human beings are defined by their ability to make tools that no other organism does in anywhere that approaches that. And so we have used tools like pens and tools to construct. In medicine, we use a tool to get a better idea of what's going on inside. And in this case, POCUS, to me, is the ultimate tool. It's safe. It literally fits and syncs with your smartphone or with Wi-Fi. And so it becomes a part of you. Your phone is a part of you. And my point of care instrument is a part of me. I have two, right? And I don't go anywhere. When I travel on a plane especially, I've had so many calls, When I travel to faraway places, I'm from Belize, and I go in the rural areas, that's the only show in town. Or it's a place where everyone knows you. It's a part of me. I whip it out, and someone invites me to their house, and I picked up people with heart failure. So it's a part of me. It's a part of my culture.
Thank you. That's fantastic. The questions are definitely rolling in. The next one that we've had come in is, I've checked Amazon for your series, which is I can find individually, but I'm looking to purchase them all as a bundle. Is there a location where I can purchase all of the volumes together?
There was an update that was they're on an Amazon page under my name, but they could write me and I could send them some links. There's some updates still in progress for the original. By the way, if you were to ask me, I wrote and I illustrated these books, but it was something that I wish I did not have to do, but I believe that I had the desire and I developed the skills to do that. But the whole intention, if you were to ask me why did I write these books, it's literally I am creating a big restaurant with a big buffet, modular content that people can pick, choose, and refuse, because I just thought that having content, especially, the anatomy that you learn in medical school is not the anatomy that you do with echo. The patient is in a different position, and you literally have a tool like a scalpel, a sonographic scalpel that you have to learn how to, align and how to maneuver, and which means that you're literally a surgeon with a sonographic scalpel. So I was trying to put together content that is easily digestible, visual content, because for my own self, I knew that, like when I traveled to Belize, I don't have the luxury of a cardiac sonographer. I needed to know how to use my tool. And certainly if the tool is in my pocket, I can't call anyone. I have to show up. And so I actually developed these content. Literally, I hope, and before long, that this content will be available in bits and pieces. You may just want a little, you may not want broccoli, you may just want, onions. But, it's modular content, and that was the aim behind the book. Another aim behind the books were also this. because you had early adopters like emergency medicine, right? And they had different instruments which were different from cardiology. And you also had like the heart displayed, you know, some on the right side of the screen, some on the left side of the screen. So it was also an attempt to at least try to use some of the standard terminology and measurements and views that is done by, especially regarding the heart, by, you know, the American Society of Echocardiography. So that was the thinking behind it, but how we could standardize and how we could make content available. Standardization of the views as well as availability of content.
Thank you. We have another question here. I am a certified athletic trainer. How do you see POCUS impacting the sports medicine industry?
The what industry, sorry?
The sports medicine industry.
Wait, I don't know if there's my fan in the background.
Sorry, I can
me,
repeat that again. I can repeat it again. I'm a certified athletic trainer. How do you see POCUS impacting the sports medicine industry?
Sports. You know, sorry about that. Sports. I have a list, but I am the one who actually speaks badly. Fantastic. You know, right now, like in Italy and in other places, you know, every athlete has to have a cardiac screening exam. They're looking for stuff that causes of sudden cardiac death that you can pick up on echocardiography. Things like what they call HOCM, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So echo is a screening tool that is widely adopted, especially in competitive athletics, you know, international athletes. I think, you know, we've all heard about athletes, whether they're football, basketball, or soccer players or whatever, have dropped dead from sudden cardiac death. Echo is an important screening tool. Of course, there are other causes like arrhythmias, which you won't pick up easier. You won't pick up on the echo unless it's showing up in terms of the rhythm at that time. But yes, echo is an important tool, increasingly important in sports medicine.
Thank you. I also see it looks like some of our attendees are chatting in the chat box, and there's a couple of websites that people have shared to help provide resources for our athletic trainers as well. And the next question that's come, oh, sorry, Dr. Bulwer, go ahead.
No. So please continue.
The next question that's come in is, what advice would you give when medical providers are not open to POCUS interpretation versus formal ultrasound to implement management or intervention?
You've touched on a very important thing that I ended my last slide with. I didn't touch on this, but there's what you call institutional standards, institutional practice, as well as, you know, practice within the specialty. If you look at how medicine started, is that even specialties like emergency medicine, I think 30 years ago, you would find it hard pressed to well, maybe not 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago, so many of these specialties didn't exist, right? And there was a lot of juggling that took place, who can do what, who is competent in doing what. But as medicine has become more standardized, we all work within systems. And take, for example, if you do a point of care ultrasound study, or worse, if you do a full echo study at an outside hospital, and you come into a hospital like the Brigham and Women, many patients are referred, well, they do those tests over again. No one goes on what examination was done by another person to decide on their management, for more reasons than one, both temporal as well as practice and medical legal stuff, that you need to make decisions based on, you know, the standards and expectations within your institution. And so one of the challenges that POCUS presents is that medicine is not the Wild West. And so if you fine. Whether you're in anesthesia, whether you're in critical care, whether you're in emergency medicine, when you on the front line and you see something that's cardiac, there's a system of referral to the cardiologist. So there's a limit to what is expected of you in terms of diagnosis. There's a limit to what you can do in terms of your own scope of training. So it's a matter of institutional standards and practice, and that has become increasingly established in medicine. I'm sure if that answers that question, but that's my take on it. If you have a follow-up, I can address that.
No, I think that that's really great, and it's very interesting. I think the question you definitely
and maybe I should add something to that. One of the great things that point of care can do, and what the American Society of Echocardiography and College of Cardiology does recommend, is that they see POCUS as an extension of the physical exam. For example, you hear a murmur, right? You can look at, you can get an idea whether that's, one of the valves is involved, etc. But it's more like a yes, no answer. Is there fluid around the heart? Is the heart squeezing? Yes, yes. Is the heart, it means systolic function. Is it systolic function, does it look okay? Or does it look worrisome? Do the valves look leaky or not? Is there fluid around the heart? A lot of those yes, no answer is what is expected or within the scope of, let's say, a primary care or an internist scope of training. And when they see such a patient and they put that diagnosis and management plan together, part of that is that patient is referred, to cardiology. But, how POCUS is viewed heavily depends on institutional practice. It heavily depends on actually where you are. Because remember, outside of the United States, there are different rules that apply.
And I think that that's a great transition to our next question, which is, I would like to learn POCUS, but I have an international medical degree. What are my best options?
I think that like learning to ride a bike or using a phone, you have to have a phone, right? Or a bike. And I believe that one of the best ways to learn POCUS is to have access to equipment, which is one of the big stuff, and to have access to cost-effective simulation tools. There are a number of offers out there, right? There are more apps being built. There are more websites. Some of them are just free access sites. We are actually working, because one of my dreams is because this thing, it has to be a multi-institutional, multi-national effort where you have access to cost-effective device as well as to access to the training. But there are different groups working on it. But from my end, I'm actively working on plans to democratize the content, just like you could have, for want of a better word, a Facebook or a YouTube of content or apps for content. And then I believe also that the devices, the price is going to go down. So it is the task of our time, because there's this huge transition that is taking place, and many, many people are doing good work all over the world. And I believe that I would really love to see those efforts become even more harmonized, so that any person who wants to use POCUS can say, hey, you know what, just like I go to YouTube or Facebook, I can go into my, website and get my entire curriculum. I can pick and choose what we're doing. And it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. So I could give some more specific information if the person is free to contact me on LinkedIn or whatever. I could point them into specifics. I mean, there are good sites online. There are good institutions that help. Some of them, of course, are paid. But there's a lot of information that is out there that you can get for free. I mean, YouTube, all over, just thanks to Google, okay?
Thank you, Dr. Bulwer. Next question that's come in is, what do you consider as the leading challenges or obstacles to POCUS training more broadly, especially in non-emergency medicine specialties?
The biggest obstacle, I didn't list it there precisely, but it's actually medical culture, meaning that, I'll give you a specific one. Up here in Boston is an influential professor, this is years ago, an influential professor, he's a professor at Harvard Medical School, professor of medicine, he's a professor at MIT. He wrote a piece in the Harvard magazine, blasting POCUS. And he made a key saying, you know, about the doctor-patient relationship. And you're introducing, quote unquote, cold technology, right, to interfere with the doctor-patient relationship when that relationship is more engaging. And I smiled to myself because I can see where the resistance was coming from. Part of it is medical culture, right? I hate to say that historically, because it's hierarchical, right? If it doesn't come from the top, and the practice of medicine, I mean, don't overlook the fact. Doctors, take an example. Doctors don't like to learn from sonographers, cardiac sonographers. They believe that if their teachers can't teach them, those are the only people they have maximum respect. I hate to say that, but that's my honest observation. Medical students, if you have a good idea and if their teachers are not doing it, especially if they come from Ivy League institutions, I know the culture well, right? They're not going to listen. They're going to listen to the man who says that POCUS is a waste of time compared to the person on the ground. And you know what I did with that? When I went down to South Carolina, saw Dr. Hoffman, Dr. Rao, Dr. Blavis, I went down there, and one of my #1 things was to get Dr. Hoffman and his team to visit Harvard Medical School, which he did. And then the adoption process started. So there are obstacles, but because POCUS speaks to what doctors do, much of the obstacles had to do with institutional perceptions, politics. But given the opportunity, given that if you could have the right kind of device with the right kind of price point, with the right kind of support, with the right kind of curriculum, this thing is happening. And if you look at the trajectory, there were institutions that were resistant or seemingly resistant, you know, a decade ago that are champions now. And so I like what Dr. Hoffman said. I really love this quote. He used a quote from Victor Hugo. He said, an army of invaders can be resisted, but not an idea whose time has come. Point of care ultrasound is more than an idea whose time has come. It is here. It is here for the taking. It's just a matter of time. I believe that one of the things that can lower that barrier is to try to tailor ultrasound to what doctors do rather than teaching them POCUS. It may sound strange, but if you help them to do a better job at what they normally do to expedite patient care, more accurate diagnosis, patient engagement, satisfaction, and learning, I think you have a winning formula. And, you know, there are more than one way to skin a cat, not one size fits all. But I believe that I know POCUS is broad, but my bias is the heart. It's not that I'm biased with the heart. It's just that the heart is such an engaging, fascinating, hypnotizing organ that, honestly, you only learn about the real heart in a living human being in real time. There's no other technology that does that than ultrasound. None. Even when you go an MRI or CT, those are like, that can't plug into a phone. I can't teach students with that. I can't teach them the cardiac cycle in real time. So there are huge advantages, not to mention cost of access and connectivity and smartphones, you know, use the group. So this thing is poised for the taking. It's a matter of time, but we have to tailor the curricula to the user. And I think the more you reach them on the other side of that bridge and you bridge that gap, the more likely it is for more adoptees to come on board. But it's going to happen. This is part of my life mission, and there are many others. Your own Dr. Rao has, you know, he's been the exemplar. He did stuff that were never done before. And I salute, you know, all these pioneers who did so much. I mean, even this POCUS Certification Academy, I did not realize, you know, you've been, you know, bridging that gap, the gap needed in curricula and content. So the pieces are in place, and it's going to reach a critical point where, you know, no one wants to be left out, and it's just that we need to have the best devices in place, the best kind of curricula that's tailored to all comers, and we're getting there.
Thank you. I think we have time for this last question, and I think you're actually on the perfect slide for this question. The question is, with respect to POCUS, where are we in the technological adoption life cycle?
We're straddling the gap. There's some who have crossed this, but if you look at the numbers, if you look at the, you know, it's even more than, because when you speak about POCUS, you can speak about whether it is actually part of the institution, right? Institutional standards of practice, or whether it has to do with, let's say, having a personal device. If you're looking at personal devices, we're literally at the maybe less than 1% of all the people, a fraction of 1% of all the people, you know, who have a stethoscope. In other words, if I look at the metric as, if I use a standard as those who use a stethoscope who are candidates for POCUS, right? How many people have a stethoscope? How many millions? Let's say 100 million, right? There's less than 1 million people who have a personal ultrasound, you know, device. So from a device standpoint, you know, it had to do with device acquisition. But let's say you have the best device, because if I give everyone, no offense, man, this is just a play on words. It has nothing to do with this brilliant device. But if I give everyone a butterfly, it still can't fly, because the instrument itself is not the solution, right? It's a tool, but how do you merge a tool with practice? And so where we're at, my educated guess is that we're at, if you look at it from the United States point of view, I would say it's less than, you know, 5%. If you look at it globally, it's less than a fraction of a percent. That's my guesstimate, of course. So we're still on the left side of that curve. We haven't crossed that chasm, because the more you go outside of wealthier countries where equipment could be financed, so you have institutional buying, you know, that's not a situation in much of the world, in most of the world. So we have ways to go. There are a lot of challenges to overcome.
Thank you, Dr. Bulwer. And this has been an incredible conversation. A lot of really great questions. So thank you to our audience as well for asking questions and being engaged with us. I think that this is a conversation that needs to continue, especially as we want to jump from that left side to the right side of this curve. But Dr. Bulwer, thank you very much for sharing your expertise and time with us today. This does conclude our webinar. A recording of this webinar will be made available on the POCUS.org website. Thank you all very much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you again, Madeline. Thanks to the audience. Happy to at least be able to share my thoughts on this matter. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Bulwer.